Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Straight Talk Whiskey. I'm Nick here with you as always, and thanks for joining us for episode number 90. And also a happy Thanksgiving to those of you celebrating today. That's when this video is shot, at least. Today we've got another expression from Johnnie Walker, and it's a really exceptional whiskey. I must preface this whole review with after tasting it a little bit beforehand. But we have one of the limited edition from Johnnie Walker's new-ish range of experimental whiskeys, which I think has really brought them up to the level that whiskey enthusiasts and connoisseurs and the like are currently looking for in the marketplace. So you look at Compass Box, which has been blending whiskey for a while now, but has been taking some pretty bold risks in the sense of creating new expressions and doing different types of things to make it unique. So we have the Johnnie Walker's Blenders Batch. It's a 10-year-old whiskey, meaning that the minimum age of the whiskey that comprises this expression is at least 10 years old. And it's a blend of 3 grain whiskeys as well as 2 malt whiskeys from Mortlach and Cardew. And so really, legally speaking, we're just talking about a blended Scotch whiskey. So it's not a blended grain whiskey because you do have the malt mixed in there as well. So as for the aging, it's been aged in American oak casks, and this is number 3 on the Blenders Batch. So I'll just try to give you a little more of a close-up there so that you can see. But it's got Jim Beveridge name on here, and the proof we're talking 82.6, so 41.3% ABV. I always find it interesting whenever I see somewhere in between like a 40 and 43, because 43 is usually where you see some whiskeys that have stepped up their alcohol content, and it's, you know, a pretty good step in the sense of offering whiskey drinkers and consumers a little bit higher proof for their money. But whenever I see like a 41 point something percent ABV, it's always interesting. So let's get into the whiskey. Take a look at it right here. So 10 years or more in American oak casks. Is there caramel coloring added to it? I think so. After looking at it, it does look like a little bit has been added. And sometimes the proof is a little more clear when you just look at the bottle itself sitting on the shelf. So I definitely saw the typical Johnnie Walker / blended whiskey / entry-level Scotch whiskey colorant that is noticeable in many a Scotch whiskey that has a clear bottle on it, so as to entice, let's say, all kinds of whiskey drinkers, but those who have come to associate a certain color with a level of maturation and age, sort of trying to parallel that with wine, which isn't obviously always the case, that the longer it's aged, the better it is. I mean, even for wine, that's not always the case, but that's sort of the rule that's been ingrained in everybody's mind because it's supposedly easy to remember and it makes sense for a lot of people, but the falsehood of that and the one-dimensionality of that sort of thinking is not always great. Because it can mislead people into what they should expect quality-wise. But anyway, it does look like there's caramel coloring in it. Probably is chill filtered. Nonetheless, this is where we are. It's got sort of a goldish bronze color to it. And let's go in for the nose. I gotta say, as we're approaching the winter time, and we're deep into November now, this gives a welcoming, refreshing sense of springtime and early summer. What I'm getting on the note is a really fruity, but fruity in the sense of light, fragrant, almost yogurty type fruit flavors in there, like blueberry, strawberry, little hints of melon in there. There's a little sense of smoke in there, like from a peat fire. It's got a certain pepperiness and a bite to it, caramel, vanilla. It's just this really overtly orchard fruits, candied notes, candied apple in there even. Because there is this sense of caramel and just the sweetness that you may get on like a going past some of the food and candy vendors on like a pier or a carnival or something like that. If it were right by the ocean or something, picking up that brininess from the salt in the air. Just really exceptional aroma to this. So let's go in for the taste. The first thing that caught me off guard when I tried this was the fact that I had expected a traditional sort of mouthfeel and texture that I've gotten in other Johnnie Walker expressions. But when I tasted this, the thickness of the whiskey itself was far greater than any other Johnnie Walker expression that I've had in the past. So a lot of those notes that I got of those candied sweetness, the blueberries, the strawberries, almost like melted down sugar, and just sweet candied notes, some grape in there, all just sort of formed into this syrupy, really flavorful, tangy, sticky candy notes. I keep going back to the candy, but that's really what you get. It's like walking into a candy store with this whiskey. And I love that, and I love that the flavor profile of this whiskey is so different than what we're expecting, especially considering the fact that there's 3 grain whiskeys blended into this whiskey, because a lot of people will say, or they associate, here we go again, going back to making associations and assumptions with certain, keywords or phrases or sayings with whiskeys and their labeling. So with the grain whiskey, we always say, well, it's the lesser quality stuff. It's got so much grain whiskey in there. We column distillation and all those sort of things sort of get a negative connotation a majority of the time, especially in the Scotch whiskey world. And so what you have here is just crushing those stereotypes of what grain whiskey is. And here you get an excellent idea of just how much flavor that can add to a whiskey and how important it is to be a part of that whiskey. Not just because you can continuously run column stills and make a higher volume of that whiskey at a higher proof. So after you get through those grapes and apple, berries, the strawberry, blueberry, like I already mentioned, it tapers off into something that is a little bit like melon at first, and then transitions into this honeycomb, still this sticky candy scents that we're going with, but just a smoother vanilla bean note. The texture kind of smooths out a little bit, but the flavor doesn't leave that. What started as syrupy and very sticky as a mouthfeel sort of calms down towards the end and gives a nice exit and finish onto the palate, which is pretty long lasting for a whiskey like this. this is a whiskey that I could and will just come back to and sit there and sip it. I can't imagine, I wish I were more into cocktails. I'm not. But for those people who are into making their own cocktails or enjoying whiskey with, something else, either not just over ice, but if they mix with anything else, may find this a really interesting whiskey to use as a base for those cocktails or mixed drinks. So I would definitely give that a shot. Give it a shot if you can find this just by itself at first, and then see how you can work that into your other drinks that you may mix up. But I could possibly have this over a bigger ice cube or something like that, only because it's really refreshing and it's really reminding me of summer, and even though it's cold outside, it just makes you want to cool off for some reason, or have it chilled or at a cooler temperature than room temperature. So definitely really interesting. This is a fantastic expression from Johnnie Walker, and they really hit this one out of the park. I found this just at a local grocery store here that has it because, again, like I've said in previous episodes, the selection near where I am is far more limited than where I used to be. So you kind of gotta, look around a little bit harder and pick up some of the oddities when you can find them. So this was just a club special for only $35, which is what made me grab it. I had no idea what to expect. I had never heard of it before. I didn't really know that they were experimenting sort of with a range of things. I knew that they ventured off and did different things like the Johnnie Walker Double Black. Certainly I've reviewed that before. But in terms of dedicating a specific expression of limited edition whiskeys to just these experimental things, I had no real keen sense about. So I'm really glad I came across this. I'm looking for more. I know that this says number 3 on it, so there's got to be some others out there that I can find. So if I were going to give this a score, I would go with, let's say, 94. So that wraps it up for this week. As always, if you're going to drink, drink responsibly, and see you later.